Hi, and welcome to another episode of I See Data People. This is a very special recap episode because we had a few listeners that asked us to kind of recap what we've heard from our first 10 guests and focus on specific subjects that we found interesting in talking to them. So here we are, and thank you very much for listening and for joining us. Omri, what exactly are we talking about?
Hey Evan, I can't believe there's been already 10 episodes. So it's crazy. But today we're actually going to talk through four key themes that we found really interesting and coming up in most of the discussions. First of all, is how to bring a product to market, how to price the product, the rapid rise of AI, and actually predictions for the next 5 years. But right before we start, I want to invite everyone who wants to be a guest on our upcoming episodes. So feel free to reach out. It's always great to meet new people, hear new stories. And in particular, we've noticed that we have quite a guest selection bias in the industry specifically, and which is mainly male. So we'd love to hear also more from female leaders in the data industry. Please reach out. So let's start by discussing what it takes to bring a data product to market. Evan, I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, I think productization of data products specifically is a unique thing, right? It's not the same as taking a research product or consulting the market, that's for sure. It's a little more similar to taking a software product to market. And I think a lot of our guests touched on this in different ways, right? We had guests talking about customer education, simplifying the product so that it broadens the audience of who can understand what that data unlocks or what it provides to them. There's also more of a need to understand market segmentation and product differentiation. And I think a lot of our guests touched on the idea that, hey, it actually takes quite a bit of data engineering to make the data easily usable, easily ingestible, easily delivered. That is kind of different from the data science work many of them thought they would be doing to supplement their data product. And so I think we can kind of touch on each one of these themes. I know I personally was very interested to see um, our very first guest talked about this. I think Dan Entrum used the quote, just because you're buying the ingredients doesn't mean you know how to cook the meal, right? And I think that is a really nice way of boiling down that customer education component. Omri, what do you think?
Right. I want to add to that the Dan Haas quote, who says, "Your data is not unique." Right. I mean, people think your data is unique. Everyone will understand it. Everybody can, in a click, oh, this is amazing. You have to buy it. But no, it's data is not unique. You need to understand it. You need to teach the customers what's in the data, what insights you can create from it, what insights you can't create from them, because they come up with expectations, and you need to make sure you understand and they understand the biases in the data and what it can solve for. And I think that process of simplifying and creating kind of a use case library that makes it very easy to dive into the insights, dive into what you can create and what you can derive from your data, whatever, if it's just on one stock, if it's on an industry, or on the entire market. You have to know what you can actually get from that, and and then you can actually dive into the next step of here's the product. Or before that, you don't really have a product. Before, like, just data is not a product anymore. Uh,
Omri, you said something that's near and dear to my heart, and probably I preached this to so many companies over the years. The idea of using case studies, not white papers, case studies, right? Things that make your data tangible, identify how people can actually use it. A white paper is a great thing to establish credibility, but very few people are going to sit down and dissect your data that in that much detail unless they see the value in how it fits into their workflow, how it improves their process. It gives them investment insights. It gives them insight into their customers, right? Something about that data needs to really resonate with them from a use case standpoint, not just from a theoretical, here's a nice white paper. I think
but that's
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 something.
I mean, I want to touch on this one. That making a white paper and writing it, it's super hard. Like, it takes time to create a use case. It takes time to create a white paper. How do you approach this one?
Yeah, I approach it actually the simplest way possible, right? When I was building Prattle, my co-founder and I both had significant academic backgrounds. We thought that having a book published on our first data product was a great piece of credibility. We had white papers. And we kept finding that we just couldn't get that to resonate with our clientele. And we started putting together a one-page case study, literally just a chart and 5 bullets. And all of a sudden we had this library of case studies. We built out a case study book that we could hand off for our clients and show them different ways that that resonates, right? Different ways that, whether it's a macro trader that wanted our central bank data, or whether it was a equities trader who wanted access to information on earnings calls from an obscure small cap company, right? We were able to drill in and show them where there was value and how to use the data. And it converted us not only a lot of sales to quants, but actually a lot of sales to fundamental and quantamental asset managers as well, because they had a more visceral understanding of what they could do with that data. And I think that's really where case studies matter a lot. I also think that it's about that simplification I referenced before. It also highlights that product differentiation. Ed Lavery in our episode with him referenced 3 pillars to identify the value of data. One being the accuracy, next being the uniqueness, right? And then really how many questions can it answer? And having case studies shows that it is accurate in the instances it needs to be, that how it's unique, and it identifies what types of questions it can answer. And so it makes that all more simple and approachable to potential clientele.
Right. I totally agree. And to kind of touch point on that, Adidia actually said, you're actually buying descriptive information as a subscription. So essentially, if you if you yourself actually create those insights, those use cases, white papers easily, that means your clients can also do it. If you can't, then that means you'll need much harder time to actually sell the product and convince anyone that there's value here. And it really jumps into our next subject, which is the pricing of the data and how we actually price it. I'll start by thinking that, there's no one way to price the data. I think it's about simplifying it for the customer and 100% understanding what they're going to do, or how they're going to use the data, to give them the best pricing and context to the pricing. What do you think, Evan?
I've often said that pricing is the hardest thing for an entrepreneur to do. When you start a data company, it is so hard to figure out what the value of that data is, not only to the generic client, but to each specific client, right? And Dan Entrum touched on this in our very first episode, that depending on your use case, data can have dramatically different value. Same data, just very different value. And it has some dependency on how much money they're running, how many other factors they might be looking at. But if we start breaking into the more fundamental users, as opposed to people using it in a pure quant use case, it can also be a workflow tool to help save them time. And that's a really hard thing to buy. And so, I think that a couple of big themes our guest touched on, sometimes customers are going to pay more money for less data, right? If it's more curated, that is a value for them. They have to spend less time digging through it to get to that layer of insight. I think Ed Lavery really hit on that. And I think that's absolutely. And then, consumption-based pricing was a theme that came up over and over again. But it's not clear that anybody's actually figured out that model. And I know, Omri, I know you've got a lot of thoughts on consumption-based pricing.
Right. So I actually thought about it a lot, and I changed my mind during this thought process. And it separates into what the customers want and need, and what the buyer wants and needs. Right. So the incentive of the buyer is to have as many customers, meaning low consumption model. They want to come early, small, and then grow with time. That's the aim of the data vendor, of the provider. And then the incentive of the client is to have something, like Tom said, to have a stable subscription that he knows exactly what his budget is, and knows exactly what he's paying for. And so there's actually different incentives for those different types of players in the market. So I started by saying, oh, this is the great model. This is what we need to aim for. But actually, with time, I understood, no, this is actually a bad model for the specific data industry at this point in time, right? In the future, it might change. But at this point in time, I don't think there's going to be an adoption of a consumption-based model until we actually develop a strategy and everybody get used to it. So we need an AWS in the data market that can create this type of model. And subscription model having a stable idea based on the consumption. So that's my approach. So thinking about, you have an API and they're going to use about, they're trading the US market. So they need, I don't know, 2 million API calls. That means their subscription is X. And I think this is the way to price it, more than actually saying, oh, you're going to pay, if you're 1.5 million hits, you're going to pay 50K. And if you're 2 million hits, you're going to pay 60K. It needs to be a subscription. It needs to be known. It needs to be easy to understand. And it needs to be stable over time, in my opinion, at least.
Yeah, and I guess I'll push back on one aspect of that, which is to say, people have been able to solve, or I should say businesses have been able to solve for the budget forecasting issues around consumption-based or usage-based pricing for compute, right? So that's how cloud compute works, AWS, Azure, GCP, right? So they've been able to solve for that. So I think you can get around the budget issues. I think the harder piece is, how do you really figure out the price point for things like historical data, right? Some use cases, the historical data is the greatest value, and each incremental data point is a lot less valuable. Whereas
Right.
other use cases, it's the opposite.
Exactly. And if we provide, history and the customer has to pay for that, then we have to go to jail based on Mark. So I think that's actually a very great difficulty in the industry, because in order to actually test the data, you have to have the history, but then the data provider actually gives up a lot of value going forward. So the customer is not only paying when he signs up for the future data set, but actually also for the past. And this is hard to kind of discriminate and separate on the pricing model.
Yeah, that's right. I'd forgotten. That's right. Mark, that charging for historical data trials, I believe, I think he was advocating for those folks to be shot. And so, I think that's a pretty strong and controversial opinion. I think there is a pervasive view among data consumers that historical data needs to be freely available for testing. Now, the caveat is that's where a lot of people are building models off of that historical data. So charging for that becomes a major question mark in a consumption or usage based model, and I don't know that we've solved for those questions yet. And obviously, look, OpenAI has figured out how to do a usage based model for GPT, and I think there are a number of other software tools out there that are doing that. But it's a different thing when you're looking at data where the value might actually be predominantly on historical information or historical access, not current. And just the use cases vary so dramatically for how people are using the very same data set.
Definitely. And well, maybe in the future, we can actually use AI or ChatGPT to price our data in a better way. And that's also a caveat to our next subjects about the AI and machine learning industry, right now and also in the future, which is a super interesting subject. And I think, Evan, you had a very interesting prediction a few years ago, which is starting to come true.
Yeah, yeah. Looking back on my own prediction past and how good was I at forecasting the future, I have to say, back in 2018 when Google launched BERT as the first widely available large language model, I was running an NLP company with Prattle, and we had built specialized models on analyzing how market reaction to central bank and corporate communications, we were using that market reaction to understand the language patterns and how that was causing specific patterns. So we had built out a bunch of specialized models, thousands, and realized very quickly that the iteration of large language models was going to allow people to come in and build on top of LLMs and get to a data set that was almost as good as what we built, that took years of specialization and iteration to get there. Now, I also think back on that same time frame and remember being in a meeting and being asked, what did the group of folks there think was going to be the common technology that was available today? And this was back in 2018, that would be obsolete within 10 years. And my bold prediction was that search would be dead within a decade. And we're 5 years later now, and I'm looking around and saying, a chatbot is not search. That's very different. Now, my thesis then was that Google would be able to predict the next thing I was going to search, and therefore just surface that information to me. I still think that that's very much a possibility.
Right. I think the change and the trend that goes on right now with from search to the ChatGPT, the chatbot that actually answer your questions, it actually needs more specialization and a little bit more expertise in what you're actually looking for, what you're actually asking the chatbot, because it doesn't lie to you, but if it doesn't have enough information, there's a big problem. You're going to get a wrong answer, and it's not going to tell you that it's wrong. It's not going to tell you that he's missing some of the data. And I think it's also, looking forward, that's also the reason why data is going to be a must-have in the future, and it's going to need a lot more information to feed those models to actually give you the right answer. So data is not going away because AI comes into the market. It's actually becoming much more valued and required for any chatbot to have the right data in order to train. It's like the Bloomberg GPT, which is I'm really looking forward to looking at it. It's going to be super interesting to see how those kind of models actually react. Uh,
Yeah. So I think one of the interesting things that has come out of the rapid proliferation of generative AI tools is absolutely the need for better and more training data. A friend of mine is a business school professor who decided to use GPT to write a case study about my first company, Prattle, and he sent it to me, and I went through and marked it up. There was a ton of red ink. It was highly inaccurate. And then, he was going to use that as an example to teach his class about what happens when we trust a chatbot to fill in information. And there were just inaccuracies that it fabricated because it didn't have the data. But that was predicated on GPT 3.5. When GPT 4 came out, he ran the same exercise again. And I could tell just from reading the case what sources it was looking at, how much more data it had trained. And there were only two minor corrections. And it was a profound
wow.
instance for me of identifying how great data being available to train a model completely changes the outcome, right? One of those things was pretty darn reliable, and the other one was really not useful. And they were presented with the same level of accuracy. To a person who didn't know the full story, they might have interpreted both of those things as equally accurate. They weren't. And that's why having the right underlying training data is so and more important now than probably ever. I think that puts data owners in a really interesting position. Uh, I also think, I've talked to a lot of folks in the venture capital community, a lot of startups recently who looked at building out specific functionality in the AI world. And a lot of the vertical solutions, whether it be AI for taxes or AI for legal, or that those solutions were phenomenal ideas and continue to be, and they might be great businesses, but there are a lot of questions now about what happens when those businesses scale. Will, will OpenAI just have so much training data they can have a comparable model out compete with your business in a matter of weeks or months, and suddenly your business you thought was going to be a multi-billion-dollar enterprise might be a nice business that's worth tens of millions or hundreds of millions. Maybe that's not venture scale, and the venture capital community is really rethinking the AI landscape. And I had one VC I was speaking with actually say, this reminds him of the early days of the App Store, and the idea that at one moment in time everybody downloaded the Flashlight app, and we had the Flashlight app because you of course wanted your phone to be able to operate like a flashlight, and so everyone downloaded it, and a lot of people paid $1 for that app, and then it was so ubiquitous that they just built it into the operating system. Right. The platform won. And so I think that the AI world has the potential to look very much like that, where these horizontal platforms can come in and just eat everybody else's lunch. And the vertical solutions might be nice niche businesses, but it's going to be really hard to scale those businesses.
Right. I totally agree about that. I think there's a new trend in the industry to, first of all, open source is something I see a lot. Like I see every AI company, every platform is starting to open source their code, their platform, give free trials because ChatGPT is just starting to take over. And I think those even vertical platforms, at least right now, will still have a room, a business to operate, but it's going to become much harder to scale them up because the minute this information goes out to the public, or the public figures out how to get this information into those AI and chatbots, then that's it. Your company is not worth anymore. And it's a really delicate situation right now in the industry where you need to, if you can beat them, join them. You need to understand how you can actually join this movement, this AI, in order to be able to, first of all, make your product much better, which is much easier right now. You can create insight much faster. ChatGPT, just feed them your data, ask him the right questions, start building through it, and you can actually, accelerate your progress, your product much faster. It's crazy, and I've seen this happen with a few, products and data vendors. So I'm really looking forward to the next few years of this combination of our industry and our world. And I'm sure that episode 50, I hope we get there, is it's going to be much more about the AI and integration, and people will talk in a different way about AI and chatbots, um, in a much more interesting way, I think.
Yeah, and I think that that's a great point. Is if we pluck out a few key themes from what our guests predicted for the next 5 years, one of the first things that comes to mind is really a lot of them pointed to AI being used to streamline data ingestion and expand the number of use cases for data. And I think that's exactly what you're hitting on, Omri. We're seeing more and more use cases pop up every day, and data become valued in a different way across so many different applications. And every guest kind of assumed that data demand would continue to rise and be used across different markets, new sectors, and essentially data will continue to proliferate. And therefore the tools to utilize and make the most out of that data become increasingly important as we go forward.
100% agree. It's in the future, it's going to be much more interesting to connect the dots, or connect the people, in order to really get the right insights, the right information, know what's out there and what you can use. So I'm really looking forward to the next episodes and the next few months. And I think we're going to wrap it up. And Evan, it was great to have this first 10 episodes with you. Really enjoyed it, and really enjoyed everybody that came up on the show. Thank you all. Um,
Thank you, everybody. And Marie, I think this has been fun for me and hopefully fun for our guests. And quick reminder to all of our listeners, if you're a potential guest or people who are, please let us know. We're always interested in speaking to the smartest and most interesting people in the data space. And we will continue to work on finding those guests for all of you. And if anybody has suggestions for us, we're always open to feedback. So please reach out. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys, and see you soon, Evan.
See you soon.